hunting,
fishing,
cooking,
camping,
conservation,
travel,
gardening,
photography, family.
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 This is the Outdoor Ruhls podcast. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoor Ruhls podcast. Really an extra special episode today. Way back in the before time, before kids and before lots of professional responsibilities, Caitlin and I, as we've talked about in the past, had the pleasure of working in Yellowstone National Park, doing fisheries work originally there for both of us. And in that time that Caitlin and I were both doing fisheries work, we met a really incredible person and had the pleasure to work with them there. And so I would love for today's guest to introduce himself. Go for it, Ben.
Right on. My name is Ben Goldfarb. I'm an environmental journalist and an author and former AmeriCorps fish tech for Yellowstone's Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences program, where I met both Caitlin and Mike in the fateful summer of 2009.
And then Caitlin's here too. Say hi, Caitlin.
Hey there.
All right. Yeah. So, Ben, let's just maybe jump into Yellowstone a little bit. I'm curious. There's a few things from your time there that stand out for me, but I'm curious what stands out for you from your time working in fisheries in Yellowstone.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, I was just surrounded by all of these dirty Phillies fans. I didn't really expect that. I'm wearing. I know it's a podcast, so nobody can see what I'm wearing, but I wore my Mets hat. I grew up in New York, and I'm a Mets fan. So to get to Yellowstone and meet Mike and Brian Ertel, a couple of hardcore Phillies fans in the fish program, that was pretty jarring initially, but I managed to get over that. I mean, it was this incredible formative summer of my life. You know, at the time, I'd graduated. I just graduated college, where I was an English and environmental studies double major, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I had this idea that maybe I wanted to go into fish management or conservation in some capacity, and I ended up getting this internship, the same one that Caitlin had. That summer, and it was just, it really solidified, my desire to work with wildlife. And I took a different path. I'm a writer these days, but that's still a capacity that gets me out into the field with fish and wildlife people all the time. I'm writing a book about fish right now, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
so that was,
I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah, so that was just this, hugely formative, memorable experience, and I think about it all the time.
I remember a couple of specific projects that we worked on together. We were doing some native trout restoration stuff, right? I think you were there for Specimen Creek, was that right?
I sure was, yeah. I wore my Tyvek suit, spreading rotenone, yeah.
Yeah, we were removing non-native fish to make room for West Slope cutthroat trout, which that ended up being the career track that I really stayed in myself. And then I remember some unbelievably cold nights on the Madison River.
Yeah, I knew we were going to talk about that. Yeah.
That was, I've been in the fisheries field for almost 25 years now, which is bothersome in its own way to me. But I think that those nights on the Madison River electrofishing for brown trout may be some of the most kind of hardcore pieces of field work that I've done in my career.
Yeah. I mean, there were a couple of nights out there for sure. And, we were electrofishing at night on the raft because, of course, it's the Madison River in fall, right? It's like the greatest brown trout fishery in the world. So, it's getting fished hard during the day, and none of those anglers want to see their trout, floating belly up, stunned. So, yeah, we were out there at night, and it snowed a couple times, and obviously you're sticking your hands in the water to process the fish. And I just remember having no feeling in my fingers whatsoever. But I also remember, I don't know if you recall this moment. Maybe it's something I like hallucinated, but I just remember, coming around a bend in the river and the headlights of the raft hitting a moose that was, standing in the shallows of the Madison. And that moment, just seeing this moose like looming up like a space station in outer space. It's just, that image has just always, it's just seared indelibly into my brain.
I think that those kind of singular moments are part of the drug that hooks you into this kind of work, right? Like, who else? I mean, first of all, you can't float on a river in Yellowstone National Park anywhere,
right?
And so nobody gets to float the Madison in the park, and then much less in the middle of the night. So it's that like view into this world that almost nobody else gets to see. And then you also have the magic of you mentioned that brown trout run, and that's why we were sampling. And it's very heavily fished. You're encountering, because we would get on the river essentially at dusk as the anglers are coming off. And you talk to these guys that have been fishing all day, and, sometimes they're pretty down. It's not what it used to be. I didn't catch a single fish all day. There's no fish in the river. And you get out there with an electrofishing boat at night, and I don't know, Caitlin.
I mean, we as the netters, whoever was the netters, were the limiting factor. I just remember having so many fish in your net that you had to pull it up and have somebody else help you dump the fish in a bucket and then get your net back down there as fast as you could to try to catch more fish. Just couldn't catch enough.
Yeah, and not just volume of fish, but size of fish, right? I mean, I live in southern Colorado or central Colorado on the Arkansas River, and here, I mean, it's like if you catch a 16-inch brown on the Arkansas, that's a pretty good fish. I mean, those Madison browns were like 24 to 30, just like baseball bats.
Giants.
It was crazy. It was unbelievable.
Right. Yeah. So no, it's a cherished memory with everybody that was on that crew. You mentioned Brian Ertel, and you and Caitlin and everybody else that we were out there with. That was an indelible moment for me in my fisheries career.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was just going to keep going down the Yellowstone memory rabbit hole, but no, we can.
No, do it.
No, I mean, the other aspect of my time there that is just like so memorable, both for the work and because of its sort of significance in the history of park management was I spent a lot of time on lake trout boats. We were both doing kind of reconnaissance on the skiff, doing some scientific netting, trying to figure out where these fish were, and also getting out on the Freedom, the big kind of the big gill net hauler. And this was the year, I think this was the year before the Hickey brothers showed up and started really hitting the lake hard, and I mean that work was just so incredibly memorable too on so many levels. I mean, catching these 20-pound lake trout out of the lake, and also feeling like that was this just epic war or battle for the future of the park in so many ways. I mean, obviously that that lake trout invasion is just this ecological catastrophe that touched everything from osprey to bald eagles to elk to grizzly bears, and I really remember feeling like I was this, foot soldier in this epic war for the soul of America's first national park. That was just such powerful work too.
Yeah, it's I think again one of the things that hooks you in is recognizing that you may be a small part of what's going on, but everybody doing the work is an important part of exactly what you said, of kind of a ecological battle to save something incredibly special and, bigger than itself, right? I mean, easy to think about just the fish, but it's a whole connected ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those lake trout are, changing elk migration patterns in Cody. You know, it is really incredible. I mean, of course, we were, you know, while we were there, I mean, obviously, you know, the wolf watching was fantastic in Lamar Valley, and everybody knows the kind of the iconic wolf trophic cascade story in Yellowstone. I mean, I feel like if you look at the scientific literature around wolves and lake trout, you'd conclude that actually the lake trout were a much more consequential species introduction ecologically than wolves were in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So, man, it's such a cherished time for me. I feel so fortunate to have spent the time there that I did. And, you know, I mean, frankly, it's hard for me to ignore the human side of it as well. The human side of it from the visitors' standpoint, but the incredible people that I worked with and that I've maintained these lifelong relationships with. Maybe one in particular.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know,
thing to point out.
Yeah, Brian and I continue to be good friends. He's not my spouse, granted, but you know, I do feel lucky that I get to go, you know, visit Brian and Hallie a couple times a year.
Ben, you know, we shared all that time in Yellowstone together, and I know a little bit of your backstory, but I don't know it in detail. So, you know, sort of from the get-go, if you will, what's the brief biography of Ben Goldfarb?
Oh, geez. Yeah, let's see. So, you know, as I mentioned to you guys, you know, I ended up at Yellowstone right out of college, and you know, I mean, in college, I always loved to write. I was, as I said, I was in an English major, and I wrote fiction primarily. My senior thesis in college was this novella that, you know, thank God, is like buried in a library drawer somewhere. Never to see. No, please,
I'm going to find
please
that.
Not anymore.
Don't do that, Mike. Don't do it. And you know, but really, you know, in my last couple of years of college, I really developed this interest in field ecology. I did this 6-month-long tropical ecology research program in Australia as an undergrad. I did a lot of bat research. I got really into bats. And so, you know, when I was in Yellowstone, I really was thinking, you know, maybe I was just trying to explore different sort of ecology career paths, and you know, I ended up having a couple of, you know, field ecology tech jobs. Did the itinerant roving technician thing. You know, I worked for the New York City Parks Department. You know, after Yellowstone, I doing urban forestry stuff. I tagged sea turtles in North Carolina. I lived in Thailand for a year. That had nothing to do with ecology. That was just kind of, I just wanted to, you know, live abroad for a while. And that was actually where I met Elise, my wife, who was a teacher at the same school as me. Maybe not quite as exotic as your guy's story, but you know, pretty.
What are you talking about?
I know, it sounds pretty exotic to me.
Yeah. Also coworkers. So you know, so I did all this stuff trying to find my niche, and I ended up going to grad school to get a master's in environmental management, whatever that means. And you know, I really thought, you know, that at that time, you know, I was a few years out of college, and I really envisioned, you know, working for like a big conservation NGO at that point, you know, maybe like the Nature Conservancy or the World Wildlife Fund or NWF, something like that. But while I was in grad school, I kind of remembered that I did love to write, and that had been a huge part of most of my life to that point. And you know, I found myself writing articles for, you know, campus publications, and started to freelance a little bit, you know, writing articles for a popular audience about the academic stuff that I was learning in grad school. And I realized that was the aspect of that work that I enjoyed most was actually writing about it, you know, in a voice that sounded like me rather than in a, you know, an academic voice. And so I ended up after grad school, I got a position with High Country News, which is a magazine that covers environmental issues throughout the American West, and I was a correspondent for HCN for a few years, and you know, started to write for other publications like, you know, Nat Geo and The Atlantic, and you know, a couple of those articles I wrote along the way turned into books, and that's kind of where I am today. I do, you know, lots of article writing, and then I've written a couple books, one about beavers and one about how roads impact wildlife, and now I'm writing this third book about fish. So that's where I'm at.
Ben, once you started on that path of writing, after you toured around, went to Thailand, and came back and got your master's, do you remember a piece of writing or a topic that you tackled that kind of gave you the confidence or really, I don't know, fueled your fire to continue on that path?
Man, I mean, it's hard not to talk about beavers in this with given that prompt, just because they're such a huge part of my own life story, and my own professional story, and now just a kind of like core to who I am in a lot of ways. I mean that, when I was at maybe a couple of years into writing for High Country News, I was living in Seattle with Elise at that time, and working as their Northwest correspondent, doing a lot of like salmon management coverage, and looking for stuff to write about. Right, as a journalist, you're always kind of attuned to new interesting stories. And somebody sent me this flyer for a beaver workshop, and I was like, I don't know what a beaver workshop is, but that sounds like that could be a lot of fun. So yes, I went to this beaver workshop, and I think at that point I had some sense that beavers were this useful, valuable keystone species and ecosystem engineer for all of the reasons that your wildlife savvy listeners have probably understand. But still at this workshop, it was just one scientist after another getting up to say their piece about why beavers were so valuable for wildfire mitigation and water quality and water storage, and I mean especially salmon habitat. Right, that's really what was driving a lot of the interest in beavers in the Northwest, and so. Yeah, I mean, it was, so I wrote a couple of articles about beaver restoration. I got really fired up about beavers at this workshop, and those articles eventually turned into a book about beavers. And, I think it was those, articles and eventually that book that, I think to Caitlin, to your question, really gave me, both gave me the confidence to I really wanted to, be a writer for forever, that was, that really was going to be the path for me, but also that that mattered in some way. Right. I mean, I think that, one of the hard things about being a writer, I think, is that you never really know who's reading your stuff. You write these articles and you put them out there, and they have their like 48 hours of being posted on social media, and then they're kind of like buried by the next avalanche of digital content, and you don't really know what you've accomplished exactly, and what mark that work has made on the world. Whereas I wrote this book about beavers, and suddenly I was hearing from agency biologists at various like Western state fish and game agencies saying hey, I read your book, and we're changing our state regs around beaver trapping as a result, and or hearing, I heard from ranchers who were like, hey, I stopped shooting the beavers in my ditches, and bought copies of your book for my buddies, and they stopped shooting their beavers, and so on. And so it was this incredible reward to know that you could write something, you could put ideas onto paper that would actually, through beaver management and conservation, influence the physical world. Right, that there were like beavers out there building dams and creating ponds and wetlands who were alive because the right person had stumbled upon this thing that I wrote. And so that that I think that convinced me that that writing really was a way to make a difference for the wildlife that I care about. And
just for our listeners' sake, that book is Eager, the surprising secret lives of beavers and why they matter.
It's a verbose subtitle that I did not choose. But yes, that is the book.
I love it because it gives me a question that I'm going to get to in a second. But no, I mean, I think, Ben, you came and visited Caitlin and I. You were here in New Mexico. Tell us about that just a little bit. I think I know exactly what it was, but I don't want to mess it up.
Well, let's see. I mean, I've seen you guys a couple times over the years down there. So now I'm trying to recall which visit that was.
You were here as the Aldo Leopold.
Oh yeah, right.
Sure. Is that right?
That is right. Yeah. So that was an amazing opportunity that kind of popped up while I was writing the book. Of course, Aldo Leopold. I think. A lot of people know him from as a Wisconsinite, right? I mean, that's where he wrote Sand County Almanac. but and that's probably why Caitlin loves him so much. But he's also he's also obviously a New Mexican, right? And spent his early career with the Forest Service in New Mexico. So I mean, yeah, Caitlin, you're really doing the Leopold trajectory in reverse, I guess. You're gonna have to finish your career in Iowa to come truly full circle.
Okay, good to know. Yeah.
But
and maybe write some wildly successful conservation books.
Yeah.
I've got some work to do.
You should get on that, Caitlin. Yeah. So anyway, so Aldo's the cabin that Aldo and his wife Estella used when they were in New Mexico is in Tres Piedras outside of Taos, and it's a writing residency. Just this incredible opportunity for visiting nature writers to spend a month literally walking in Aldo's footsteps, and I had the opportunity to do that, to be a Leopold resident, and it was just unbelievably inspiring to be in his house. And when I came up against like writer's block to think about, okay, how might Aldo have written about this, right? And it was easily the most productive month of my life. Part of that is probably that there's still no internet, and at the time there was no cell service. So that helps. Yeah. That helps productivity too. But it was genuinely incredibly inspiring. I mean, I'm just a lifelong Aldo devotee and disciple. I reread Sand County Almanac often. I finally read Kurt Miney's doorstop biography of Leopold this winter, which just gave me so much more respect for his life and thinking and commitment to conservation. And so when I saw you guys last, there was kind of a Leopold resident reunion, basically, where a lot of the writers who had this opportunity over the years all came back to talk about what it had meant to them and the experiences it had and how the experience could be improved for future residents. And so that was just a neat opportunity to network with all of these other writers who had all kind of descended from the Leopold tree.
Right.
Cool.
And we when you came down and visited us that time, we'd obviously been following your career. I'd been following your career and reading your work in High Country News. And I think we came down, we had a big elk meal here. We had a big feed on probably an elk Caitlin got if if the pattern would hold. Most of the wild game we eat is from Caitlin.
I get that impression on Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not true.
But you said, "Oh, I'm working on a book," and I thought, "Oh well, that sounds like a heavy lift. I wonder how that'll go." And you want to support your friends, and Eager came out, and I bought a copy, and I opened it up, and the foreword is by Dan Flores, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh shoot, like this is like a real thing. Like Ben's a real. Ben wrote a real book here.
I'm glad you said that because Dan lent me so much credibility for sure as a debut writer who nobody had ever heard of. I mean, Dan of course Dan's a legend, right? He's one of the great natural historians and environmental writers of our modern time, and he. Yeah, he read a draft of the book and graciously saw something in it and agreed to write the foreword and he and I have gone on to spend a decent bit of time together at various book events and festivals. We just kind of like had this fun conversation on stage at a book festival in Crested Butte, which was awesome. And so I'm glad that Dan Flores was here. He was like the seal of approval because I think that lots of readers felt that way. They'd certainly never heard of me, but they'd heard of Dan Flores.
Yeah, but the reality is it might have gotten a few people to open the book, but you deserve the credit. I mean, you wrote a book of the quality that Dan Flores was willing to write the foreword for. And for anybody that doesn't know, I know we're going to keep mentioning writers probably throughout this, and I think they're all worth checking out. But our current guest here, notwithstanding, I think Dan Flores is among the great living conservation writers. I particularly think Coyote America is just a absolute kind of must read. The way Dan Flores blends the Native American history of the coyote and, the modern history of coyotes and, all of the controversy around coyote management. It's just an absolutely beautiful work and really amazing. And then, his other works, American Serengeti and others, are really just, they're kind of treasures, I think, of conservation writing. But again, for you to have written a book that Dan was willing to do that for, I think really speaks volumes about the quality of Eager. It's a really great piece of conservation writing.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Coyote America, because that was certainly one of the books that I was modeling Eager on, right? I mean, I think Coyote America came out, I want to say it came out in 2016, which was right around when I started working on Eager. And of course, here's this, incredible biography of a controversial mammal that is loved and hated and is a critical part of its ecosystem, but has all of these management controversies swirling around it, right? I mean, how could I not, look to that book as inspiration for a book about beavers? And so, Coyote America is, absolutely a classic. And, that was one of the things I always appreciated about you, Mike, when we were, hanging out in Yellowstone circa 2009, was that, you're a fish biologist who's also a great reader. And, I'm sure we could spend this conversation just talking about books. But, Dan, along with, David Quammen and Elizabeth Colbert, and of course, John McPhee, who's every science writer's hero. Those were all of the inspirations I was looking to when I was, cobbling together my own first book.
Yeah, I made a list of writers and works that I thought we could talk about, and it became wildly unwieldy.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure that our dozens of listeners would welcome future conversations. But because it's in the subtitle, and before we move on from Eager, I have to ask, why do beavers matter?
Man, because they taste really good.
I've heard that. I've never had one.
Nor have I, actually. It's the one gaping hole in my beaver education. Yeah, I mean, of course, what do beavers do? Beavers obviously create ponds and wetlands with their dams, and those ponds and wetlands are obviously incredible habitat for, just name a species, right? Boreal toads, cutthroat trout, waterfowl, et cetera, other aquatic mammals, right? Otter, mink, muskrat. We've all, been to a beaver pond and just seen the incredible life that teems there. And of course, those beaver ponds are also providing all of these other, ecological services for us humans, right? I mean, they're, incredible little reservoirs that beavers build for us up in the high country, right? This year, I don't know what your guys' snowpack is like down there, but we're at something like 50% here in the Arkansas Basin. It's not a good situation.
Very, very bad here.
Very bad.
Low.
Yeah.
Worse than that.
Yeah. So we need some way of keeping water on the landscape, right? And hey, that's what beavers do. I mean, beaver ponds are fire breaks and fire refuges. There's lots of great emergent research about the beaver wildfire connection, and the fact that beaver ponds don't burn. It turns out, there's the fact that they're filtering out pollutants, with their by slowing the flow, they're giving all of the suspended nitrates and phosphates and heavy metals and all that stuff a chance to settle out of the water column and be entrained in sediment. So there are all of these different benefits and services, and it's been really incredible to just watch the understanding of beaver's importance take off over the decade plus that I've been writing about these guys. I mean, I think that I think because you guys are fish people, I think that's really reflected in the fish community in a lot of ways. I mean, a decade ago, my impression is that you would have had a very hard time getting, for example, a Trout Unlimited chapter to say nice things about beavers. And now, every TU chapter in the West has some kind of beaver-based restoration program, where they've got volunteers out there, building analogs, because guess what? Beaver ponds create fantastic rearing habitat for juvenile salmonids and other fishes. So it's just, New Mexico, another state that, a decade ago was kind of like a beaver laggard that, has this incredible beaver energy and restoration program now. So, it's just been amazing to watch the beaver movement really take off.
Yeah, it's definitely a change that I've felt in my career for sure.
Yeah. Awesome.
And so, beyond, before the book came out, Dan Flores and the foreword, the book was really well received, right? You got great reviews in Washington Post and Outside Magazine, and you got a couple of awards, including an E.O. Wilson Conservation Writing. Exact title of that award
close
escapes
enough.
me,
Yeah.
but I mean, an amazing reception and well deserved for the book. I guess I'm curious: did that really kind of help to cement the path, or were you already started on crossings on your next book before that all kind of happened?
Well, Mike. First of all, if I had known that you're gonna blow all this smoke up my ass, I would have jumped on the podcast sooner. Man, this is awesome.
Hey, given you've seen my quality as a sound engineer, we might be retaping this whole thing at some point.
It's a possibility. Yeah. That's funny. It's in some ways. So as you alluded to, my next book was about road ecology, about, sort of how roads and wildlife interact. And that was really this, long-term fascination of mine that even kind of predated the beaver stuff. In grad school, I'd done lots of coursework in habitat connectivity and large landscape conservation, and obviously roads are, one of, if not the primary impediment to habitat conservation. So I'd always been fascinated, for example, by the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative, right? The idea of creating this giant sort of continental wildlife corridor that would, encompass the entirety of the Northern Rockies. And so that was always this, this long-standing interest of mine, and really, like, right at the outset of my career as a journalist, one of the very first stories that I did for High Country News was about these wildlife crossings in Montana on Highway 93 north of Missoula, where that road passes through Confederated Salish and Kootenai land. Very famous wildlife crossings that get used by bears and moose and elk and all these critters, and the tribes were really instrumental in getting those implemented. And so I had the chance to take a tour of those wildlife crossings back in, I want to say it was October of 2013, and I was just totally transfixed. We had this kind of magical moment where I got to get up on top of this overpass as the sun was falling on this beautiful October evening in Montana, and it was just this magical, powerful experience that really lingered with me. And so after the Beaver book came out, and I was kind of casting about for the next subject, I just thought back to this incredible wildlife crossing experience I'd had, and this long-standing interest I had in habitat connectivity, and that was the subject that I kind of gravitated to.
One of the things about crossings that strikes me, and I don't know, Caitlin, I guess I've always kind of thought about roads and wildlife, maybe through kind of two lenses, what you just mentioned as far as barriers to wildlife movement, whether it be day to day or migrations. And I'm sure you've seen that plenty of times.
Yeah. And the automatic things you think of are habitat loss and habitat fragmentation, yeah. Right? But your book really elaborates on all of that.
Yeah. And obviously roadkill, it's kind of an inescapable reality. But, I think Crossings does such a great job of laying out so much more. I had never really thought about sort of specifically about the ecosystem of the road itself.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that as an idea. I don't know that I appreciate having to confront the sort of individual cost, the thought of individual cost from an animal standpoint, particularly the part about the parts of the book about Tasmania and folks taking care of injured and orphaned wildlife there.
Yeah.
I've sacrificed a lot of individual animals at the cost of the population goal in my career. I hope I don't get to hell and have to account for every non-native fish I've killed. But the point being that it really is a comprehensive, work about all of the ways in which roads, affect ecology and how important they are. And I congratulate you on just really doing an amazing job of putting all that together, even for somebody like me that I think is, kind of close to the subject and knowledgeable, but there's a lot in the book for everybody.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you said that explicitly, because I think that one of the things that I'm always trying to do as a writer is juggle my audiences, right? I mean, on one hand, I'm writing primarily for the lay public, the vast majority of readers who don't really know why beavers are important when they pick up a book about beavers, or don't really know much about habitat fragmentation or wildlife migration corridors. People who are curious, interested, concerned about nature, predisposed to care, but are certainly not subject matter experts. So I'm trying to write something that's sort of interesting and engaging and narrative driven, and maybe sometimes fun and funny for those folks, that vast bulk of lay readers. But then I'm also really cognizant of the fact that my work also gets read by people like you guys, people who are professional wildlife biologists, or agency folks, or or managers, or professional conservationists, right? People who really are subject matter experts in a sense, even if you don't necessarily deal with beavers or habitat fragmentation every day. You're obviously deeply versed in wildlife and ecology, and are in a position to call bullshit if you find my work not credible. I know this is a family podcast. I know that is. Can you say bullshit on that?
They drop occasionally.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I'm trying to write something that that's the line I'm trying to walk. It's like, how do you write something that's engaging and accessible and fun for the layperson, while also being credible and sophisticated enough to be taken seriously and potentially used as a resource by the real wildlife managers. And even if the professional class is only 5% of the people who read the book, those are in some ways the readers who are most important to me. And so to hear you guys say that you valued the books, that's incredibly meaningful, because that's you in some sense you're the folks I'm writing to.
I'm curious, Ben. You mentioned your fiction writing, and one of the things that I wanted to ask you here was, were you a Kurt Vonnegut reader?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Every kind of like counterculture kid was in high school, right? I haven't read Vonnegut in years, but I certainly was, yeah.
Do you consider him an influence?
That's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say consciously, but certainly in high school, he was one of the writers whose collected works I probably came closest to reading. I mean, I love Galapagos, Cat's Cradle, Slaughterhouse-Five. Run through them. I mean, I love all those books. I don't know. Do you see Vonnegut in there? That's like the highest compliment you could pay me.
Well, I do, and that's why I ask. I think that your work is entertaining to read. I mean, all of the science stuff can be pretty dry, right? And so to get people to read it, it's got to be interesting, and it's got to be entertaining from a writing standpoint. And I guess for me, when I read your work, I feel like there's kind of a playfulness to the language, a dark humor that of all the major authors that I can think of, it has a flavor of Kurt Vonnegut to me.
Wow.
Totally, obviously 100% different realms, but I think that it's entertaining, it's interesting for some of the same reasons that Vonnegut was.
That's incredibly generous of you to say. I mean, here's one of the things that I was thinking about when I was working on Crossings, because Crossings, as you guys alluded to, is largely this book about like carnage, right? About the death and destruction that modernity inflicts upon wildlife. It's pretty grim. In some ways, thematically, at least at times, although I try to be, fairly solutions-oriented. So one of the things I was thinking about was like, okay, how can you write a book about roadkill and death and habitat loss that's funny and fun to read? I think that, one of the writers that I was thinking about, who, I would certainly in college, I would have considered my favorite novelist by far is David Foster Wallace, who, is a guy who wrote these incredibly dark thematic novels about addiction and substance abuse and suicide. And yet, because he was so playful with language and energetic at the level of the sentence, that the prose was propulsive enough to pull you through some dark subject matter. And that's what Vonnegut has going on too, right? In Slaughterhouse,
for sure.
Slaughterhouse 5, he's writing about, the firebombing of Dresden, but, the prose is just this like luminous, energetic, writing style that's just so much fun to read. And so, I think that's, so maybe I wasn't consciously thinking about Vonnegut. I think I was consciously thinking about Wallace, even though I could never aspire to write a sentence that was anything near as good as the stuff he tossed off on his worst days. But I think that general idea of writing prose that is entertaining enough to pull the reader through some dark stuff, that's something I think about a lot.
I don't think I'd sell yourself short. I think you're accomplishing exactly that. I think the writing is entertaining. It's fun to read. It's it's serious subject matter. It's dark and difficult from a subject matter standpoint, but you really get the reader there, and I really appreciate that about the work. And again, boy, Crossings was amazingly well received. The one award I was curious about was the award that you received in Banff this year. Could you cover that real quick?
Yeah, definitely. Mike, this continues to be the greatest podcast. You're just asking me to talk about awards I've won. That's like the.
It's great. Ben, I don't know very many famous writers, and I put you in that category.
You still don't know any famous writers. Let's see. The Banff thing was really cool. So the Banff, probably a lot of listeners are familiar with the Banff Film Festival. The famous outdoor film festival, and as part of that, they also do a book competition. So the festival they do is really a film and book festival, and lots of the writers who go to that sort of thing are sort of like the people that you think of as real outdoor writers, somebody like John Krakauer, would be like the prototypical Banff guest, I think. But they also give awards for environmental writing that's not necessarily like ski porn, I won a couple of cool awards at this book festival. But one of the reasons that was really meaningful to me was, obviously Banff has probably the most famous wildlife crossings in the world, right? I think when most people think about wildlife crossing structures, they think about Banff. Banff is this national park that has the Trans-Canada Highway running right through the middle of it. And they have 40-something crossings for, primarily for grizzly bears are kind of like the flagship species, but obviously those crossings get used by elk and coyotes and deer and all kinds of critters. And there's this, incredible long-term research program around those wildlife crossings that really proved the efficacy of wildlife crossings in, the early to mid 2000s, when there were still a lot of questions around, whether animals used them and whether they, maintained genetic connectivity. And so, yeah, being in Banff in particular, this place that has such an outsized role to play in the history of this scientific discipline that I was writing about, and then to be honored in that place, that made it extremely meaningful. And there, Canmore and Banff have, one of the highest densities of conservation folks per capita of any towns in North America. So there were all of these cool people there, like Jody Hilty, who's the head of Y2Y, and was part of that weekend. So it was just really a blast for me and pretty significant.
It really is recognition of how good the work that you're doing is, and I know you got to be modest, but boy, if I were you, I'd be pretty darn proud of it.
If you're gonna be the next Joe Rogan, Mike, you need some harder hitting gotcha questions, though. You want me
to, we're getting there.
Okay, good.
I'm just buttering you up.
Okay, good. I'm excited.
No, I actually wanted to back up a little bit, and I'm curious. The podcast, we kind of focus on family and outdoor connections, and you told us a little bit about education and stuff. But you grew up in New York City, right?
I grew up in a suburb of New York City. Yeah, I grew up in a place with lots of green space and a view of the Hudson River, and it wasn't.
You grew
wasn't
up
entirely concrete.
From where I grew up, consider New York City.
Yeah, that's okay. That's fair. That's fair. Sure.
But I'm just curious. I mean, again, you kind of talked about the conservation work and getting into that and it being important to you, but what got you to it? I mean, what from your childhood, from your family, what were the connections that got you there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, two answers. The first, certainly my family was really important in that. My parents, Lisa and Dave, shout out those guys. They're not. They're not professional conservationists. They're both, they both work in medicine, but they're both people who, have always really valued nature and wildlife and the outdoors. They took me hiking in the Catskills and the Adirondacks and, the White Mountains in New Hampshire. They always had a, really strong conservation ethic, I would say, belonged to, all kinds of different conservation groups and causes and sort of nurtured those interests in me. So, they were, instrumental, certainly. And then I would also just say, fishing was such a huge part of coming to love nature. And this is something I'm sort of trying to get at in this fish book that I'm writing is like what makes certain people gravitate toward fish, and I've been asking this question to lots of people, to all of these fish biologists and ecologists I've been talking to. It's like, okay, when did your love of fish start? And very few of them have this clear epiphanic aha moment, right? Most people just say, like, I don't know, I always kind of like fish. And there is this, so E.O. Wilson, who you mentioned earlier, has this concept of biophilia, right? This just innate human attraction to wildlife and biodiversity and nature that comes from our deep-seated evolutionary history. And I think that some people also have this sort of inexplicable ichthyophilia, this innate attraction to fish that they can't quite pinpoint the cause of or the origins of, but is nonetheless incredibly profound. And maybe part of that gets to our evolutionary history too, right? I mean, humans have been, sort of pursuing and harvesting fish since before we were Homo sapiens, right? Neanderthals caught, bluefin tuna. And so, yeah, maybe there, so I think I always had some amount of that. I had this desire and passion to fish, even though nobody else in my family had ever had that interest in any way. And I dragged my parents on all these fishing trips and kind of forced them to get into it. And I forced my brother to get into it. And I think that fishing kind of created this wildlife interest and conservation ethic in me, even though I can't really articulate why I love to fish and love fish themselves.
I do think, I kind of spend a lot of time thinking about this and maybe telling myself some stories about it.
Yeah.
I like to think that fish are an accessible gateway to a natural world that's very often very hard to touch.
Yeah.
And when, that experience that people get fishing, like, you don't go catch a rabbit and hold it in your hand, not normally.
Right.
But you can catch a fish and you can hold it in your hand and you can be like, holy smokes, this is something special.
Yeah.
This is alive and wild, and you can't eat it, but, you can also put it back and you can have had that moment with that thing that's kind of yours. And obviously I do, I've done lots of different kinds of fish work and some of that is, really focused on just putting fish in people's hands. And I really like to believe that fish are a way to create a connection for people that leads to something so much bigger, so much deeper. And, I know my own journey started with stocked trout fishing in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And I still kind of remember the first time it dawned on me when I was holding a native trout. Like this, there again, it was a moment like, this is something different. Yeah. This is something unique. And so I don't know. And I mean, fish are just cool.
I agree with that very much. I think like another micro benefit in fishing is it allows you to experience optimism, right? Because you just never know, like, if a fish will bite, what kind of fish it will be. Will it be a big fish? Because you can't, most of the time, most fishing, you can't really see what you're going after. And so an exercise in optimism that maybe has some positive benefit.
Yeah. I love that, Caitlin. Yeah, optimism and mystery too, right? I mean, I think that's one of the beautiful things about fishing, especially in in a lot of like the the warm water northeastern ponds that that I grew up fishing, right, where there's just like this incredible species diversity. Every species of sunfish, bluegill, all the black bass, carp, bullhead, all of this different stuff. And like when that bobber goes down, you actually have no idea what's down there, right? I think that was part of the appeal too. And I've heard that from lots of fish people as well, as like just having this lifelong experience of driving past water and wanting to know what's down there, and so I think it's all of those things you guys are talking about, Mike. I love the idea of fish being this incredibly tactile connection to otherwise inaccessible wildlife, and the hope and optimism of fishing, combined with the mystery of these organisms that we can't see obviously in the way that we can see birds, for example, but are still living these fascinating lives and undertaking these incredible journeys. It's all of that, wrapped up in these organisms that, Mike, as you mentioned, are just so cool and beautiful, right? I mean, like, what could be more beautiful than, even like a pumpkin seed sunfish, just the most colorful, vivid critter on earth.
Well, I mean, but good on your parents for being willing to provide you that opportunity. Look look what it's sort of given the world.
For sure.
I mean, really.
Here's one good story about that, and and maybe you guys will, not with fishing because you love it, but with something, you'll have this experience as parents. But so I dragged my dad especially on all of these fishing trips over the years, and some of them were so much fun and so memorable, and some were just like these seasick freaking nightmares, and a few years ago we had this family reunion in Hawaii, and my dad, my brother, and I went. We went out on a boat, and my brother's not. He's not as into it as I am, but he's into it for sure. We spent like 6 hours out there. We caught one skipjack tuna. Took it back to the dock, made it into poke bowls. The best poke bowls you've ever eaten, right? And so we eat this poke meal, and afterwards, my dad and brother and I are washing it down with a few beers, and we're kind of in this like somewhat inebriated reflective mood, and my dad goes, I've got a confession to make. I freaking hate fishing. My brother was kind of outraged by it. He was like, you've been lying to us all these years, But I thought it was the most beautiful thing, right? I mean, here was this dad who'd spent, dozens or hundreds of hours doing this activity he didn't really enjoy because he just wanted to spend time with his sons, and what could be lovelier than that?
I mean, congratulations to him on utterly successful parenting. Man, this is so much fun, Ben. I could talk about all of this stuff for hours. But you mentioned the book. What can you tell us about the new book you're working on?
Yeah, well, I want to. I'll answer that question, but then I want to pose my own question to you guys as people who know and love fish. So the book. I think I'm still figuring out how to articulate this, and probably the ultimate direction will be this kind of negotiation between me and my editor, who may have different ideas. But the way that I really think about it is it's a book about fish movement as this keystone ecological and cultural process that we've screwed up in a million ways and are trying to protect and restore and understand. And so every chapter is about a different fish or group of fishes. So of course there's, obviously you can't write a book about fish movement and not have at least one Pacific salmon chapter. There's a chapter about alewives and other, eastern anadromous herring. There's a chapter about western native and non-native trout, since a lot of, where fish move to is where we stick them, of course. And, some of the Yellowstone stuff will absolutely make an appearance in that. The lake trout cutthroat dynamic is, certainly explored at length. Sturgeon, lamprey. I mean, I'm naming, lots of diadromous fish, but there's a shark chapter. I was just in Tennessee doing all of this cool like creek snorkeling with all of these little endemic darters and shiners and minnows and all kinds of all that cool Appalachian fish diversity that also undertake these micro scale movements that are really ecologically significant in their own right. So it's about just like the incredible diversity of moving fish on this planet, why they're important, and how we screwed them over and what we can do to help them.
I can't wait to read it.
Thanks. Yeah. So here's my question to you, which is that if you guys picked up a book like the one I just described, what would you want to read about? What species, what places, what I mean, a lot of this book I would say is about sort of different keystone fish phenomena, like nutrient cycling or sediment moving. So what processes would you want to read about? What do you want to encounter in a book like the one I just described?
You want to go first?
I'll go first because I'm sure my answer will be shorter.
Okay, great.
Burn.
It's not a burn. It could be a burn on me.
Mike, you're a professional talker now, so you have to be long-winded. That's part of the job.
It started long before the podcast. The podcast is more of an outlet for the long-windedness than the other way around.
Got it.
I don't necessarily have a specific area or species or anything like that, but what I like so much about Crossings was just how you brought us all over the place and touched on different sized creatures. So I think just being that comprehensive with a lot of different examples was pretty awesome, because I think everybody, again, walks away from that with something, because nobody knows every one of those topics. And the variation in scales, too, I think is really interesting to hit on.
Yeah. I love variation in scales, both in scales. There's a good fish pun for you. Both like in terms of the organisms and the and the extent of the movement and the fish undertake, and also like I think people think about fish movement and think about like longitudinal movements in rivers, but I'm also trying to bring in a lot of like lateral movement onto connected floodplains. So all of I like that. And all of those different scales and types of both organisms and kind of journeys they're undertaking. It's something I think about a lot. All right, Mike, let's hear the unabridged version. Yeah.
Well, I think you don't want to rewrite McPhee's Founding Fish, but it's another book if people haven't
read
it. There's a book by amazing piece of work about American shad. But American shad are such a cool fish and played such an interesting role in our history. But I particularly like the things, as I found in Crossings, I like the things that are unexpected. And you mentioned that incredible diversity of fish in, the Southeast. I worked in Mammoth Cave National Park, both underground and above ground. I think there's about 20 miles of the Green River in Kentucky flow through Mammoth Cave National Park, and there's 151 documented fish species in that 20 miles of river.
Wow, amazing.
That's unbelievable diversity. But then you look at how they're tied to the rest of the ecosystem in unexpected ways. And, one, I did a little bit of work about the connectivity with caves and the cave environment, but each one of those fish are playing roles in the ecosystem and doing things like being a host fish for specific types of freshwater mussel.
Right.
And you have these things called glacidia that are essentially eggs that attach to a fish, and then the fish moves them around, and that's how something that's obviously totally sedentary, like a mussel, is able to survive in a big river system. Without the fish, those things can only drift downstream, right? And then they're just gone. It's not a life cycle that works without the fish. And so the fish being there and the fish's ability to move are wildly important. And then, of course, the mussel are playing this whole other huge and important role in the ecosystem. And, including the ecological services side of things that, we don't think about, but we can value, that would essentially, to replicate, cost money.
Yeah.
I think, it's amazing to think about something as, tiny as a darter in a river in Kentucky or Tennessee or, even here in New Mexico, being this integral component in an ecosystem that does things for us that we don't even really recognize. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer, Mike. Thanks a lot. Yeah, and a good reminder to incorporate more mussel material into this book. Something that was kind of on the periphery of my radar, but now I think should be a little more central. Because
it pains me to admit it, but mussels are really cool.
They're amazing. Yeah, like the fact that so many of them have their little fishing lures to attract host fish. It's just they're mind blowing animals.
Yeah, for our listeners, if this is something that you're just like, what in the heck are they talking about? Go to YouTube and search for some videos of freshwater mussels and the amazing structures that they use, some of which look exactly like other fish, to attract a host fish to come in and get close enough so that they can put these glaucidia onto the fish, so that this whole thing that we're talking about can happen. It's a marvel of nature at this tiny scale, happening literally like all over the place in this country and all across the world, and you never even think of it. It's wild.
Yeah, and they also have like the coolest common names, right? They're all like the velvety pig snout, or the pearly snooter. They just have the greatest names.
Freshwater mussels have awesome names. You're right. Yeah, well, I mean, gosh, Ben, it's hard to thank you enough for coming on. I'm curious, I guess, as we close up, anything else that you wanted to add, or advice that you might have for young people, or not so young folks who are interested in getting into this conservation writing world.
Man, I don't know. I don't know if I have any great advice. I mean, I would love to to say to sort of like extend a thank you to a lot of your listeners. I mean, you guys are natural resource professionals who are listened to by other natural resource professionals, and I mean, those are the people without whom I literally couldn't do my job, right? I mean, like we journalists are so totally dependent on our sources, and I think that one of the frustrating things for me as a writer that has happened over the 12 or 13 years I've been doing this is just to see a lot of agencies especially becoming increasingly close-lipped and withholding access from expert sources, even agencies like the like the National Park Service that were historically pretty forthcoming with providing comment on stories and books have been sort of tougher to communicate with in some ways. And so that's just to say that the relationship that science writers have with scientists and management professionals is this incredibly important symbiotic relationship, like a freshwater mussel and a snail darter, you might say. And so I just whenever I write an article or any book or any piece of writing, I'm just so appreciative and grateful to the folks who were involved in it and gave their time to me and to the project, and I know that lots of those folks are listening to this podcast, and I just want to encourage your listeners to interact with journalists, when those opportunities arise, and we're both in some sense, I think, an embattled class in 2025, and we need each other more than ever. So big shout out to the scientists who communicate with us ink-stained wretches, and I hope you guys keep it up.
Well, likewise, keep up the good work. It's an important part of the conservation ecosystem for sure.
I hope so. Yeah, and
Okay.
and if you guys ever make it up here to Salida, man, let me know. I would love to show you some of our 11-inch brown trout.
We're gonna do it.
Sounds lovely.
I got one final question.
Okay.
Do you have a plan for handling the heartbreak of the Phillies beating the Mets in the NLDS this year?
I don't think I need one, Mike. I just
I gotta tell you, my mom listens to these things, and she's not going to be happy to hear you say that.
I think before the Phillies turn their attention to a truly first-rate team like the Mets, they should figure out how to beat the Pirates. Just got swept by the Pirates, Mike. So
you're coming off a weekend of feeling good about the Mets Rockies series, so
I'll
allow you a little.
We just got to beat up the equivalent of a Double-A team for 3 days, so it was, we're feeling good. We're feeling good about ourselves. That's the craziest thing about living in Colorado right now, and potentially having a baby, is that if our daughter grows up a Rockies fan, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do.
Oh man, well,
Just start on that right away.
Yeah.
It will happen.
Right.
Yeah, I congratulated your parents earlier, but I would like to say it wasn't a perfect job because somehow you ended up a Mets fan. But
isn't it better than a Yankees fan, though?
Oh, it's better than a Yankees fan, no doubt about it.
That's actually that's one of the things I was thinking about when Caitlin was talking about the eternal optimism of fishing. Is maybe that's why I like it, because that sort of jibes with the eternal optimism of being a Mets fan, right? This team whose slogan has literally always been, you gotta believe, right? That's what fishing is.
Well, Ben, thanks again so much for doing this. We really, really appreciate it, and it's just been so much fun to have the conversation, and I hope that we can do it again sometime.
Let's do it in person. That'd be awesome.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to another episode of the podcast. We'll be back again next week, but as always, you can find all of our content on the website, www.outdoorruhls.com. We're on Instagram at Outdoor Ruhls, of course, on Facebook, too, and we would absolutely love to hear from you. You can send us an email at outdoorruhls@gmail.com. Thanks again, Ben. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Ben. Good to see you.
See you guys.
Hunting and fishing, the great outdoors, mixing history, laughter, love, and folklore, creating memories with family and friends. These are the trophies that matter in the end. Outdoor Ruhls.